Every girl you know wants to you. Every girl you know wants you to bend her over. If that's not the case for you, then something is seriously wrong. As a man, you should naturally be magnetic enough that you can very easily have sex with any of your female friends, colleagues, or acquaintances if and when you want to. If you cannot do that, if your female friends regard you as something of a joke, if they don't respect you, if they don't find you to be sexually attractive enough that they would happily let you bend them over if you wanted to, then it's because you are lacking in something right here. This is the pyramid of sexual aura, the pyramid of animal magnetism as a man. If you have all the levels in this pyramid sorted out, then you will be attractive to all women. If you're not attractive to all women, it's because one or more of these levels is missing or absent or weak. Some guys think that doing semen retention will make them magnetic to women, and that is wrong. Semen retention is only one layer of the pyramid here. If you do semen retention without these other layers in place, it generally won't work. Or it will give you a little magnetism for a while, but then it will stop working. So in this video, I'm going to explain this pyramid. I'm going to show you 3 simple, easy things you can do that make you sexually magnetic to all women. I'm going to show you how to have supernatural powers of attraction. I'm even going to tell you how to control entities of the spirit world and cause them to literally possess girls and make those girls throw themselves at you for sex. Yes, really. You ain't gonna find anyone else on YouTube talking about this, I can assure you of that. But before we get to that, let's start at the beginning here. This is a question I got from a viewer of mine recently. He writes, "Hey Mike, I started watching your content a few months ago and I think I found gold. Your advice has helped me a lot in how I relate to women. I'm currently doing semen retention. I'd like you to give me some advice on how to make my friend, a 10 out of 10 blonde girl, start to feel crazy attraction for me and turn her into a possible partner or buddy." And I answered this question in my email newsletter. You can sign up to get onto that in my pinned comment below. New content for you every single day there. But basically what I told this guy is, look, assuming she hasn't got a boyfriend, this should basically be happening automatically. If you do the stuff I talk about in these videos and in my newsletter, your female friends should already want to you. You should already have made love to most of them. This is again assuming that they're single. I don't think I know a single woman who I couldn't have sex with if I wanted to. It's very, very easy. It's to the point where my friends now know that if they bring any girl around me, there's a very strong possibility that I will fuck her. My friends have seen me do this even with women who may have been dating another guy at the time, and it's made it so that I now have a lot of notoriety among my social circle for this type of thing, but I'm not even really trying to do this, you know? It's just that you do these practices that give you more magnetism. You follow this path of self-perfection. You do the great work of trying to transmute and transform yourself into something more than human, and yeah, you just generally find that women start to throw themselves at you and they start to make it very, very easy for you to rail them out. So in this video, I'm going to show you what goes into that. And I'm going to show you the 3 easy ways to develop this kind of animal magnetism so that you are sexually attractive to every girl. And easy is an important word to mention there because this is easy to do. And I'm not saying that to give you false hope because there are a lot of things about game that are hard. You know, approaching a woman, if you've never done that before, it is definitely hard. It requires discipline and willpower and building that as a habit. But this stuff, getting aura, getting that base level of sexual magnetism that makes you sexy to any girl, this is actually quite easy to do, and it's going with nature because your body and your DNA already knows how to do this. Your body has evolved to attract women. Millions of years of natural selection have designed the body you're in right now to automatically be sexually attractive to women. You know, the vast majority of males throughout history did not reproduce, but every single one of your male ancestors did. And therefore, your genes, your body right now is literally the winner of a 1,000,000+ year genetic war to attract females. So the ability to have magnetism to women is something that's already encoded into you. It's like how you already know how to breathe without any training. Your heart already knows how to beat on its own. It doesn't need to learn it. And having a baseline of magnetism and being attractive to women is the same way. This is your birthright. It's natural. It's something that all men should automatically have. Your body already has all the machinery in place which it needs to do this. Now, if that's the case, however, you'd naturally ask, well, why are so many men these days so obviously simply unattractive to women? Why is it that the average guy, including even guys who are decently good looking, why is it that if they walk up to a girl in a bar, the girl will usually make a weird face at them and run away? Why is rejection the default? Why do women treat you like you're invisible? Why are the majority of guys these days now so sex deprived? Is this a problem with women? Is it something they're doing wrong? And I would say, no, it's not. The real answer is actually very simple. We almost all know it by now. It's porn. It's masturbation. Being sexually attractive to women is something that's rooted in your sexual energy as a man. Kind of obvious why that might be the case, right? It comes from your sex hormones like testosterone. It also comes from your pheromones like androstenedione. It comes from the actual literal sperm that's in your body. The more sperm you have, the more it wants to get out and get into a woman to create new life. And so the more sperm you have inside you, the more it gives you this sort of electrical charge. It makes you desire women more, but it also makes you more magnetic to them. It makes them desire you more. It's just like in physics, how you can make an object magnetic by flowing electrical current through it, producing what's called electromagnetism. Well, there's also an electromagnetism of sex. And basically, the longer you go without ejaculating, the more sperm and sexual energy you accumulate inside you without letting it out, the more it builds this electrical current, and that in turn makes you magnetic to women, just like with an actual electromagnet. It makes it so that when you go outside, women are looking at you more, they're flirting with you more, and when you approach them, they tend to be friendly and receptive to you rather than being mean and hostile like they are when you're fapping regularly. So on that basis, we could say, if you want to save yourself watching this whole hour-long video here, the simple 101 intro to magnetism is don't masturbate, don't ejaculate, don't watch porn. The longer you do that, the more magnetic you become to women. And this is something you can verify for yourself if you actually try it. So if that's the case, if magnetism is just about semen retention and avoiding porn, then why make this longer video? Well, as effective as semen retention is it the case that every guy who does no fap is able to bang any of his female friends that he wants? No, that is definitely not the case. And the reason for that is, although semen retention is the quickest way to get this aura, there are a few other little secrets to this. How to do semen retention properly, how to avoid some of the big problems and pitfalls guys run into that cause it to be less effective. And so what I'm going to do for you in this video is to make a full comprehensive guide to how to get aura and magnetism using semen retention. And I'm going to cover the 3 things you absolutely must be doing if you want to be so attractive to girls that they would literally be happy for you to bend them over and start pounding them out at any time. Just like your life is a porn video or something. I mean, really. And I know that sounds like a hypey promise, but it's 100% true. And if you think that sounds unbelievable or unrealistic, I would suggest to you that you might not realize how much women actually like sex and how much they genuinely love to have wild sex with any guy they do find attractive, so long as, again, they're single, of course, and so long as it's all done in a discreet way, which doesn't harm their reputation and which allows them to have plausible deniability. In other words, not feel too slutty about things. So, a girl who's a friend of yours, it's almost never going to be that she overtly tells you, let's have sex or come to my bedroom, because she doesn't want to seem too easy. But if you're an attractive guy, if you have aura, if you have magnetism, and if you were to get her alone, and then if you went to kiss her, she would kiss you back in most cases, and then you would very quickly have her bent over the sofa or whatever. This is not an unusual thing. I've done that with pretty much every girl I'm friends with, obviously not including friends, wives, and girlfriends. That's off limits, of course. But if you have this aura, this sort of thing is pretty automatic. It's not some kind of crazy porn scenario. It's literally just a regular thing that happens to you sometimes in your life. It was not always like that for me, of course. I used to be very, very shy with girls growing up. I was literally an incel. I used to be completely invisible to most girls, and when I tried to hit on certain female friends of mine, I got rejected, and it was extremely humiliating and emotionally scarring, to be honest with you. So what changed for me is that I learned about this pyramid. I learned about these simple ways to hack your biochemistry to produce more testosterone, more pheromones, to produce more magnetism, and to have that aura that just kind of pulls girls to you, makes them horny when they're near you. And now I can get laid very, very easily. I've had sex with a lot of beautiful women, both through my social circle and through cold approach. So let's get cracking. Now, first off, before we get into the pyramid of aura and these 3 simple ways to get aura, I want to talk about what aura actually is, specifically what is sexual aura. I've talked about this at length in some of my other videos, but basically your aura is a kind of energy field that surrounds your body. If you're a man, your aura is naturally attractive to women. Now, aura is just a word we use to describe this. It's a bit of a woo-woo term, but what it really is a sort of field. I believe it's an electromagnetic field, and there is scientific evidence to suggest this. For example, science recognizes that every human emits an electromagnetic field which extends a few feet from their body. It emanates from the heart. You can look into this if you want on Wikipedia. And I believe, based on many years of experimenting with this, that this electromagnetic field is the key to attracting women if you are a man. Why do I believe that? Well, before I answer that, I want to make it very clear that everything I'm going to say here is speculative, and it's not based on scientific studies. It's not based on an article I read or videos I watched. It's based on my own personal experiences and my own personal experiments in which, over the past 12 years, I cold approached thousands upon thousands of women.
I'm something of a scientist myself.
So to give you just a little bit of background, in 2012, I started cold approaching women every day. I was approaching girls around my college campus and in bars and clubs later that night. And at around the same time, I also began experimenting with what is called semen retention, or nofap. This is where you don't watch porn and you don't masturbate, the idea being that it gives you more confidence, more energy, seems to make you more attractive. And that was a very, very new idea back then. It was not commonly talked about online. So I was kind of groping in the dark and putting all this stuff together for myself and trying to work it out on my own. So over the next several years, I experimented heavily with these two things, which most men at the time, again, were not doing. Number one, cold approach pickup. That is to say, cold approaching dozens of girls, complete strangers, every single week. And number two, semen retention. Now, what I found was very simple. The longer I went without masturbation, the more receptive women generally were to me when I approached them. If I went for about 2 weeks without ejaculating, without watching porn, I would go out to a nightclub, and when I approached women, they would usually be friendly and warm to me, and I'd very often end up making out with them, and then later, as I got better, actually going home with them and having sex. At that point, of course, I broke retention, and so it became this kind of frustrating cycle. However, when I masturbated, I found that if I went out and approached women, they would usually be much more hostile to me. They would seem to be less interested in me, and it's not necessarily that they would be mean to me, but it seemed like I was more invisible to them when my balls were drained, so to speak. But when my balls were full, when I hadn't ejaculated in several weeks, women were not only nicer and more friendly towards me, but they would even look at me more, glance at me more. In some cases, they would actually come over and approach me. And that never happened when I had masturbated. Now, at the time, I really need to make this clear. This was not good news to me, so to speak. You know, I liked masturbating. I liked porn. I liked it a lot. You know, some of the best times of my life I had watching porn. I did not want to come to this conclusion that semen retention made women more attracted to me. It was very, very far from what my own personal preferences would have been. You know, if I was designing the world, if I was designing the human body, I would make it so that the more porn you watch, the more attracted women are to you. Honestly, I think that'd be great. You know, that would be wonderful. I'm not opposed to porn and masturbation on some kind of a priori level. I'm not religious in any traditional sense. I certainly wasn't back then. But my own personal experiments and experiences convinced me that if I wanted to have this magnetism to women when I go out and approach them, I needed to not masturbate. I needed to not watch porn. So understand here, I'm just giving you the very, very quick rundown of this. There's a lot of nuances I'm kind of steamrolling over here because we have limited time and I'm just trying to get to the point. What I'm trying to show you is the background here of how I arrived at this idea of sexual aura as being the core thing that attracts women. Now, this idea that electromagnetism is the key to getting girls and that this seems to be increased and strengthened the longer you go without ejaculating, this is a big claim, okay? I'm making a huge claim here. And I need you to understand two very important things before we go further with this. First off, the reason I believe this aura doctrine, we can just call it the aura theory for short. The reason I believe this is not that I read it in a book. It's not based on reading scientific studies about attraction and trying to derive the truth from seeing, you know, what they all agreed on or something. The reason I believe this is purely because, unlike the vast majority of men out there, I went out into the real world and I cold approached thousands of women, and I found that this is what works. This is the only theory that explained all of the facts which I encountered. No other theory of attraction explained these facts. No other theory could account for these facts. And no other theory actually worked to get women to want me. This worked. This actually worked. And once I'd hammered out the details and the nuances and solved some of the little problems that came up, like I'm going to show you, it became very, very easy for me to attract women and get laid from cold approach. So everything I'm saying here needs to be viewed through that lens. Please believe me when I tell you I am completely agnostic about all of this stuff. I don't want my theory to be true because it's mine. It's the exact opposite. I developed this theory only after I'd rejected dozens of other theories I came up with because those theories didn't explain the facts that I kept knocking up against. And this theory did account for those facts. You know, cold approach pickup is a fucking knife fight. Like, if what you're doing doesn't work, if the theory you have is wrong, the result is you get rejected and potentially humiliated in front of lots of people. And that hurts. That stings like hell. And so going through those experiences hundreds of times as I got better at this, it forced me to figure out what is the actual objective reality of what creates attraction versus what gets you rejected? Because these things were extremely urgent for me to know. I was not sitting in an ivory tower as some kind of academic trying to figure out, what's a nice theory that sounds good about how attraction works. I needed to know the actual truth because until I found that truth, I kept getting pain in the form of rejection. So if what I'm saying to you in this video contradicts the science, if it's not supported by double-blind studies or something, then my fucking apologies to you, my friend. I didn't have the luxury of getting this theory squared away so that it would agree with all the studies. I had to figure out what actually worked in the field live on real women when my ass is on the line. This is also why I'm completely uninterested about getting into debates about this topic. Take it elsewhere. I don't care. Okay, now the other thing which naturally proceeds from that is you need to personally verify everything I'm going to tell you in this video for yourself. Just because I say it does not mean it's true. You need to try it for yourself and verify the truth of this with your own experience. This should be obvious to any of you that have a fucking brain, but apparently it isn't, because every fucking day I get questions from guys asking me things like, well, I liked your video on semen retention, but what would happen if blah, blah, blah? Or, well, if that's true, then wouldn't a girl stop being attracted to you right after you had sex with her? Wouldn't it cancel out? Now, if you're asking me questions like this, you're not going to make it. You're just not going to make it. I'm sorry. You need to be testing and verifying all of this for yourself with your own experience. So the answer to all theoretical and hypothetical questions like that is, I don't know. How about you try it and see for yourself?
So what am I to do to get new listeners, to survive, to have...
I don't know, Teach! Maybe use that huge brain of yours to figure it out! You ever thought of that? What am I to do?
So that's how I discovered this principle of the sexual aura and animal magnetism. It's basically a field that surrounds your body. When you have it and when the field is strong and potent and healthy, women are more attracted to you. Now, this leads us to the question of, well, how do you create this field? How do you create this aura? How do you make it stronger? And this all boils down to a simple model that I call the pyramid of aura.
This
triangle
is extremely dangerous. It has voodoo qualities.
This is the key. This is the answer. This is the ultimate blueprint for how you can become irresistibly attractive to any and every woman on earth. Okay, so let's get started. This is the pyramid of aura. It is composed of 4 layers. There is the foundation layer, testosterone. There is the middle layer, semen retention, sexual energy, sexual electromagnetism. There is the third layer. This is sexual transmutation, the alchemical great work or Magnum Opus. This is the work of self-transformation, building will, doing magic, becoming a conduit for the will of God or the gods. And above that is a fourth and final layer, which is more or less impossible to explain in human language. For shorthand, we can just refer to this as involving higher states of consciousness, mystical experiences, religious experiences. Now, the first 2 layers are pretty simple to understand. The third and highest layers are the hardest ones to explain and put into words. There's many, many different ways you can describe these top layers. It can be called your connection to the divine, your connection to God, the source. The way I would describe this top layer is that it's about becoming a conduit for higher powers. If you want to call that God, that's up to you. And then basically at that level, the aura you have is because the woman looks at you and she is essentially seeing God at that point. which is not to say you are God. Actually, it's the opposite. This is not about claiming these powers for yourself. On the contrary, it's about realizing that, to quote Homer Simpson, I am merely a vessel through which genius flows. So this is the highest level of this work. It's essentially about self-deification, becoming one with the divine, becoming a conduit through which the gods or God acts in this physical world. However, we can't start with that. That's way, way, way above where we are now. We've got to start here on the ground floor because this is what everything else actually depends on. And this is a very important point, and this is why I chose the pyramid to represent this system. The lower levels are necessary as foundations before you can get to the higher levels. This will become clearer as we go on. So we start with the foundation of the pyramid, the absolute baseline of what makes you a man and what gives you masculinity and an aura, and this is testosterone. Now, when I say that testosterone is what makes you a man, I'm obviously oversimplifying. In actual fact, the human body is unbelievably complex, but this layer basically just refers to your hormones, your biochemistry, specifically to the male sex hormones like testosterone, and it refers to everything you do that affects those hormones. Now, testosterone is at the foundation because testosterone is absolutely essential for having sexual aura. That is, for attracting women. And as most people now know, the average man today has extremely low testosterone levels relative to previous generations. And I'm not going to get into detail about raising your testosterone in this video because, simply put, you can find that elsewhere. This is territory that other people have already covered very, very well. My aim with these videos is to give you more esoteric stuff that hasn't been discussed much or at all in other places. However, I'm telling you now, if you aren't taking aggressive measures to increase your testosterone, then by default, it is probably low. That's just the environment we're in now. The modern world is estrogenic for a lot of different reasons. And all this stuff should not be new to you. You should already know the basics of raising your testosterone. It's something you should already be an expert in. If you're not, forget about sexual aura, forget about animal magnetism. It will never happen for you if you have low testosterone. And most guys today do have low testosterone. So like I said, learn how to get high testosterone from other resources. The information is all easily available online. You don't need to get sucked down into crazy rabbit holes like icing your balls or eating raw onions or something, but just do the handful of core fundamentals that make the biggest difference. Those are, number 1, weight training, lifting heavy weights. Number 2, healthy food. Number 3, sleep as much as possible. And number 4 is supplements. And if you're listening to the audio version, I would advise you to go ahead and look at the video because I have details of all these things on screen here, but I don't want to read it all out because I just want to move past this quickly. Now, the supplements to take for testosterone, the ones I religiously take and what I found to have the most effect are zinc, magnesium, Panax ginseng, vitamin D, cod liver oil, grass-fed butter, and 3 Brazil nuts. Also, you definitely need to take copper supplements to balance out the zinc because otherwise you get gray hair from copper deficiency. Now, I've experimented with every supplement there is, everything that's marketed for testosterone and sex drive, but this list above, this is what I take every day. It's what I've been taking for 10 years, puts me on the fucking moon in terms of sex drive, libido, testosterone, magnetism, even just good mood, not being depressed, feeling good as I'm going through life. So I'm very much against that whole magic pill philosophy, people looking for shortcuts, people looking for easy outs, but this actually is a case where there is something of a magic pill shortcut to testosterone, and it is this list of stuff I just gave you, particularly the butter, the vitamin D, the zinc, the cod liver oil. There's a lot of science behind this, things like vitamin K2, which you get from butter and which is vital for testosterone. This is a good time to remind you that I am not a doctor. This is not health advice. This is not medical advice. Consult a doctor before you take any supplement or do any of these things. I'm just telling you from my own experiences as a biohacker, as a guy who runs these experiments on myself constantly, this is what gives me the best results. This is what always gives me that crazy level of libido. And we're going to get into semen retention in a moment, but this stuff is arguably even more important to building your aura and your magnetism because really your lifestyle stuff like sleep and exercise, if those are off, it's really, really hard for your body to produce the testosterone it needs. And then the foods and the vitamins you consume are also super, super important here. I've gone periods where I was doing semen retention, I was doing NoFap, but I was depressed, I had low libido, I had almost no sex drive, and I was even also working out. I was doing all the stuff you're supposed to do, yet I was still depressed. And then I remembered, oh yeah, I stopped taking those supplements. I stopped taking the butter. I stopped taking the Brazil nuts and the liquid cod liver oil. So I started taking those again and bam, 3-4 days later, I'm firing on all cylinders again. I'm waking up with huge boners. I'm getting boners in the gym when I see girls in yoga pants. We're back, baby. So understand, a lot of this stuff really does come down to what you eat. It comes down to the actual vitamins and minerals you're putting in your body. Without that baseline of good health, good diet, good exercise, good sleep, none of the rest of this stuff I'm going to say will work. So make sure you've got this part dialed in before you go further. It's a precondition for the rest of the pyramid. That's why testosterone is the base. Okay, once you've got high testosterone levels, Now we get into the next level of the pyramid, and that is semen retention. Now, I already covered this a lot at the start of the video, so I'm not going to repeat myself here, but the bottom line is that the longer you go without ejaculating, it seems to increase your body's production of pheromones. And this partially explains why women are so much more attracted to you when you're retaining. So, what is a pheromone? Well, pheromones are chemicals in the sweat of an animal which make animals of the opposite sex attracted to them. There is evidence that humans emit these pheromones and that in men, the sex pheromones that attract women are strongly associated with testosterone. So for this reason, when you increase your body's testosterone, that increases your pheromones. And so when women get close to you, they get kind of high. They get hornier, they get more attracted. What seems to really increase these pheromones, however, is semen retention. You know, if you imagine your aura being like the rays of the sun, you know, those rays are coming off your body and they're kind of warm. But if you put the rays of the sun through a magnifying glass, it makes them much, much hotter to the point where they can literally set things on fire. Well, semen retention is a bit like that magnifying glass. If you're already a healthy guy, if you've already got high testosterone levels, then you've already got something of an aura. You've already got a little bit of magnetism. You're already producing pheromones. But then when you do semen retention on top of that, it's like putting your aura through that magnifying glass. It makes it much, much more powerful. Now, as I said, I think this is because of pheromones. I think it's because of actual chemicals that your body is emanating when you've been doing semen retention. Girls can literally smell this on you, and unconsciously it makes them attracted. Now, I should mention here that when I first began experimenting with this was my working theory of animal magnetism for many, many years. The idea that it's all about these pheromones. And that seemed to explain, for me at least, why women would noticeably be more attracted to me if I hadn't masturbated in a while. I was eventually forced to discard that theory, however, because there were just too many things that happened to me that could not be explained by pheromones alone. For example, I'd have situations where I'd be walking past a stopped train I'd just gotten off, and a girl sitting by the window of the train would suddenly turn her head and stare at me as I passed by. And I'm thinking that's magnetism, but is that the result of pheromones? You know, pheromones can't pass through glass. Or another example, this was a really crazy one. I was walking home one night and I'd been doing semen retention very intensely for about 2 months, which meant I was not only not masturbating, but I had actually rejected sex from a couple of really pretty girls who wanted to sleep with me. So I'm walking home and I passed by this packed, busy bar with tons of people outside. And as I'm walking past this bar, a girl runs right up to me and jumps into my arms. You know, young, pretty girl, about 21 years old. She'd been walking towards where I am from the opposite direction with her friends, and she sees me and she just runs right up to me and jumps into my arms, wraps her legs around my waist, wraps her arms around me, and she's just like, "Hello." And I was honestly completely in shock. I mean, I'd had girls check me out and show interest in me before, but this was like a completely different level of magnetism that I didn't even know was possible. I was actually so surprised I didn't even capitalize on the opportunity. I just let the girl jump down and she kind of giggled and ran away. And meanwhile, her friends are screaming, they're laughing, they're apologizing to me. They seem to be as surprised by this as I was. So it was experiences like these and many others that, you know, pheromones just didn't cut it for me as an explanation. It just didn't make sense, because you'll have experiences like this when you do semen retention for long periods where girls will become very attracted to you, but it will happen in a way that could not possibly have been caused by them inhaling your pheromones, because it would just take too long for the pheromones to travel in the air for that to happen. And so this led me to my current model of this, which is that pheromones are a part of attraction. They are a big part of animal magnetism. They're a much bigger part than most people think. They are one of the reasons that women are much more attracted to you when you're doing semen retention. And pheromones are almost like the sort of the denser aspect of your aura, the more coarse aspect in physical matter. However, pheromones are not the full story. The full story of how magnetism really works is actually electric. It's about electromagnetism. It's about electrical impulses in the air around you, impulses that might be detected by the girl instantly, even if she's 50 yards away. And you can basically model it like a field. Now, where this gets interesting and where we start to get into much more speculative territory is when we talk about how this field of magnetism around you is affected by your sexual energy, and even more importantly, by your actual thoughts. Now, this is also the point in my model where we are no longer talking about testosterone. We're no longer talking about hormones or pheromones. We're no longer talking about anything that materialistic science has really discovered or has any sort of useful information on. I mean, try putting a thought under a microscope. You can't do it, right? And yet thoughts are objectively real. They must have some kind of material basis. Presumably, thoughts are electrical impulses in the brain. And so, if magnetism to women is actually about a literal electromagnetic field around your body, then what you think about continually, these electrical impulses in your brain, they may have a real effect on this field. And that is indeed what I've found to be the case. Simply put, semen retention alone will not give you magnetism. You also need to have complete purity of thought. I know, it sucks, right? You want to be able to watch porn, you want to be able to edge, so do I. Doesn't seem to work though. Not if you want the magnetism to women that I'm talking about here. Maybe doing semen retention and edging has some benefits, or it's, better than fapping or whatever. I don't know. But it appears to me that whenever I've done that and then approach women the next day, they are mostly repulsed by me. Whereas when I do semen retention while maintaining perfect purity of thought and avoiding porn, avoiding edging, that's when I go out and have women literally approaching me, telling me they love me, telling me I'm beautiful, etc. That happened to me just last week. So that's the basic introduction to getting magnetism. Don't ejaculate, avoid porn for 2, 3, 4 weeks. You will notice you become more and more magnetic to women, and the magnetism basically will increase and become more pronounced the longer you do that. I gave that example of walking down the street and having that girl literally jump into my arms. Crazy shit like that will happen when you're on long periods of semen retention, like several months. It's less likely to occur if you've only been doing it for like a week or something. Okay, now that's the basic technique. When people try to follow this, however, they typically run into a couple problems. I definitely did it first as well. The biggest of these is what's called nocturnal emissions. This is where you ejaculate in your sleep, and so you lose magnetism, you lose aura. And you may notice that after this, you feel less potent, you feel less electric. You notice that women may not be as interested in you as they had been, and so this used to be a big problem for me. I'd be doing semen retention for a few weeks, it'd be going great, but then I'd have a nocturnal emission, and boom, now my progress stops. I have to start again from scratch. And it can take another 2 to 3 weeks to build up. That's obviously not good. And I constantly get questions from guys about this who've gone through the same thing. It's one of the biggest problems that plagues guys doing semen retention. It sounds like such a silly thing, like, how do I stop cooming in my sleep? Like, it's sort of hilarious, right? Like, help me, I can't stop cooming. But if you have done this work and you've seen some of the benefits you get from these longer periods of retention, it actually is very frustrating when it all gets thrown away like this. So if this hasn't been a problem for you yet, then feel free to skip this section and go on to the next part of the video. But if you are having nocturnal emissions and you want to stop them, then watch this. This is the best way I've found to do it. And basically this comes down to 3 things. First way I found to prevent nocturnal emissions is meditating for 20 minutes before bed every night. This is something that I think you should be doing anyway for the many other benefits of it. It also increases magnetism, I believe, although somewhat indirectly. But one of the benefits I found of meditating before bed is that it does seem to prevent nocturnal emissions. It seems to give you better, deeper sleep. And I think that the deeper your sleep is, the less likely you are to have an emission. That's just my hunch. So meditating definitely helps with that. It can also help with some of the extreme lust cravings and even the anger and negative emotions that some guys have when doing semen retention. Meditation basically grounds the sexual energy and makes it less wild and uncontrollable. Now, the second thing I found that reduces nocturnal emissions is what we already talked about. It's purity of thought during the day, keeping your mind pure, not watching porn, and avoiding lustful thoughts and fantasies. Obviously, you can't completely avoid all thoughts of sex. It's not realistic, but I just mean try to keep them to a minimum and never look at porn, don't edge. That seems to prevent nocturnal emissions as well. Now, the third way I found to deal with nocturnal emissions is simply to accept that they are going to happen from time to time. At this point, they happen to me every 2-3 weeks, but simply make sure you're getting plenty of healthy food, lifting weights regularly, and taking those supplements I advised earlier, because what I've found is that when I do those things, even when I do have an emission, it doesn't actually seem to take me out of the game for too long. And it may even be the case that sometimes the nocturnal emissions can almost actually help you, because if you've been doing semen retention for a long period, like a month or more, the sperm does degrade over time. It does get stale. And so every once in a while, your body may need to expel that old stale sperm so it can replace it with new healthy sperm. But don't use this as an excuse to break semen retention. Key here is let your body decide on its own when you're asleep. Don't say, oh, I think the sperm is getting stale. I better fap to some porn to get rid of it. If you have that type of mentality, you'll just never stick with retention long enough to get the magnetism. You'll always find an excuse. So my point is only this. If you have a nocturnal emission every couple of weeks or something, don't worry about it. Keep taking the right vitamins and minerals, keep lifting weights, keep your testosterone high. You'll be back to full magnetism very quickly. You don't seem to lose the same amount of energy as you do when you fap. Now, this is also the answer to another question I commonly get asked about semen retention, which is, okay, this magnetism thing is great. It's definitely working. But what if I actually want to have sex with a girl? Do I completely go back to zero and have to start from scratch again? And the answer is yes and no. On one hand, if you want magnetism at full radiance, do you have to start completely from scratch again after having sex with a girl? Yes, definitely. I mean, especially if you had good sex with her and you came multiple times. However, that being said, if you're doing all this stuff we said before to aggressively increase your testosterone, the weightlifting, the supplements, eating lots of beef, eggs, etc., if you're doing all that stuff, enough, then the time it takes you to bounce back after sex is going to be much, much shorter. You know, a couple little tricks to this that I found. First off, right after you ejaculate, drink lots of water. Like right after sex with a girl, go to the kitchen, fill up a pint glass with water, down the full thing, then fill up the glass again and bring it into the bedroom to sip on. Get her some water too to be applied, obviously. When you do that, you'll find you're ready to go for round 2 much, much faster. Water has a big, big effect on lowering what's called the sexual refractory period, how fast you can have sex again after having sex the first time. And this also means that staying hydrated is key to bouncing back and building back your magnetism after an emission. Okay, next up, I want to address another big question I get, which guys commonly ask me, and that is like, well, okay, you're doing semen retention to get girls, but obviously when you actually get a girl and have sex with her, you're breaking retention, so how does that work? And this is kind of nuanced because on one hand, semen retention gives you magnetism, right? And so when you have sex with a girl, you lose that magnetism. But on the other hand, testosterone also gives you magnetism. And science has shown that when you have sex with a new girl, you get a big boost in testosterone. Sex also raises your levels of other hormones like oxytocin, which also play a big role in magnetism. And so the way I look at it is, it's like there's actually 2 kinds of sexual magnetism. There is the magnetism you get from semen retention, and there's the magnetism you get from having sex with a new girl, especially if she's young and hot, i.e. fertile. And so what I find tends to happen is that when I've just had sex with a new girl, I tend to have a certain level of magnetism after that as well, even though I just drained my balls and busted all kinds of nuts. And this is why, as a pickup artist, you can sometimes find yourself getting on these kind of rampages of momentum where you pick up a girl, you have sex with her one night, then you go out the next night and you're super confident, you feel completely bulletproof, you pick up another girl, you sleep with her, the next night you go out, you get another girl. And this type of thing has happened to me many, many times where I'll get into kind of a groove and wind up sleeping with 4 or 5 different girls in a single week, or even a couple girls in a single day. And on the surface, this seems to disprove the theory of magnetism, right? Because you're busting all these nuts, but you still have this magnetism to women. In fact, in some ways, your magnetism to women is actually almost stronger when you've just had sex with a new chick. I think any guy who does cold approach pickup successfully will tell you that's the case. You're also a lot more relaxed, you feel less edgy, more loose, way more confident. So the way I look at it is that there's actually 2 different and opposite paths to magnetism. There's a right-hand path to magnetism and there's a left-hand path to magnetism. The right-hand path is to become magnetic to women through complete celibacy, but the left-hand path to magnetism is found through complete degeneracy and debauchery. And that basically means sleeping with a new girl every week or even every night. I can tell you from experience that does definitely give you magnetism. You can also see this in history. Guys like Fidel Castro or John F. Kennedy, who had sex with a new girl literally every day. I mean, just bent them right over the desk. And those guys were magnetic and charismatic as And so you might say, well, doesn't this kind of disprove your theory? Well, the answer is no, because I've never said that semen retention is the only way to get magnetism. What I'm saying is it's one of 2 different and actually opposite paths to get to the same destination. The reason I talk about this path to attain magnetism, the path of celibacy and semen retention, as opposed to the rock star path to attain magnetism by fucking a new girl every night, is that odds are, if you're watching this, you are not a rock star. You do not have the ability to a new girl every night or every week, and so talking about that is completely pointless. However, I do want you to bear that nuance in mind as we go on. If you can get your skills with pickup to the point where you're having sex with a new girl every week, you are going to be really magnetic to women. Period. Point blank. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Semen retention is for beta males. Semen retention is for nerds. And I'm not saying that as an insult. It's a good thing because it means there's a way for anyone to get these powers, no matter how low down you start. But there is another way to get magnetism and aura. It's called being a fucking rock star. It's called being a winner. It's called transforming yourself and empowering yourself and learning the skills to get a new girl in your bed every day if you want one. And that does give you crazy animal magnetism. Anyone who tells you it doesn't is coping. So the point of all this is not for you to do semen retention and avoid women for the rest of your life. That's called wasting your life. That's called spitting in God's face by not living life to the max. The point of semen retention is to give you the fuel and the energy you need to change yourself and transform, to become the type of guy who can get girls even when he's not retaining. And then when you do that, when you've built those skills, then you become a law unto yourself. And now you can have all the sex you want and still be magnetic, just like JFK or Castro or Motley Crue or whoever. So how do you actually do that? Well, that brings me into the next level of the pyramid of aura, and this refers to the highest, most potent aura and magnetism you can get, and this is the aura you get from what's called sexual transmutation. This is also called self-perfection, self-empowerment, self-transformation, or self-transmutation. In alchemy, in Hermeticism, in magic, they refer to this as the great work. This is what the energy you get from semen retention is supposed to actually be used for. So basically, sexual transmutation means that you are getting this increase in sexual energy from semen retention, but you then transmute or convert or transform that lower, more coarse energy of sex into higher, more subtle, and more potent forms of energy. In psychology, this is called sublimation. For example, Sigmund Freud said that all human excellence, all feats of engineering, architecture, art, invention, and so on, came from men sublimating their lower animalistic urges of sexuality, their libido, into these higher pursuits. There's also a much higher form of sexual transmutation that's possible, however, and this is where, instead of directing this sexual energy into creating art or making money or something, you can also use this energy for the purposes of self-perfection, self-transmutation. Changing and reprogramming your own body and your own personality to give yourself powers which you didn't have. And then to make those powers permanent so that they're no longer dependent on you doing semen retention. They can't be taken away from you. They're hard programmed into your nervous system as a permanent part of you now. It's similar to how, like, once you learn to ride a bike, you can't forget it. You know, once that's in your muscle memory, it's there for life. Can't be taken away from you. Even if you haven't ridden a bike for 30 years, you're still going to remember as soon as you get back on the bike. Well, in the same way, you can use the excess energy you get from semen retention to transform yourself and learn new skills, such as, for example, how to cold approach women and generate attraction in them immediately. And once you've programmed those skills into your nervous system, once that's in your muscle memory, they can't be taken away from you. So now, after this process of self-transmutation, you can attract women even when you're not retaining. You have that as a skill now, which means you don't have to be in a special state to do it.
See, once you know what's in it, you can tweak it, re-engineer it, get the bugs out, taper off. I'm off it, Carl.
You're no longer equipped to
I may
fight
be off
me.
it. You think I didn't learn anything? That my synapses didn't change? That I kept absolutely nothing?
You have no idea what kind of enemy I can
That
be.
van's gonna rear in that taxi.
What?
I see everything, Carl. I'm 50 moves ahead of you and everybody else.
Now, a lot of people will tell you that semen retention and sex transmutation are the same thing, but this is wrong. Semen retention just refers to saving this energy, stopping it being expelled from your system via orgasms. Sexual transmutation, however, means actually using the energy for some higher purpose. It means working with the energy, transforming the energy, putting it to use. And again, this is why I say that semen retention is for betas. See, there's this idea that if you just sit there and you mark the days off the calendar and you've done semen retention for 100 days in a row or something, that's going to automatically fix everything in your life. And that's not the case. You need to use this energy. You need to transmute it. You need to put it to work. This is another big reason for nocturnal emission and craving porn and masturbation, by the way. It's because you're not transmuting the energy you get properly. You have to channel it into productive activities like approaching women, lifting weights, making money, acquiring knowledge. And when you do that, you won't generally get those same cravings. So what I just mentioned there are 3 ways you can transmute this energy. I recommend you do all 3. You sublimate your sexual desire into approaching women, going to the gym, and making money. And these 3 things work very synergistically. You know, you might think that spreading the energy into these 3 different areas would make it weaker than if you just focused it all on one thing. It's actually the exact opposite. And the reason why is that these 3 different forms of transmutation I just mentioned, they actually work on the 3 different aspects of your being as a man: your body, mind, and emotions. So lifting weights obviously transforms your body. It makes your body stronger, bigger, more muscular, leaner, better looking. Working hard and making money transforms your mind. It forces you to acquire knowledge about objective reality, to think more clearly. Meditation is also a good way to build your mind as well. Builds your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for willpower. And then approaching women, mastering cold approach pickup skills, this transforms your emotions. This strengthens your emotional body. In some occult and mystical circles, they call that the astral body. If you want to be a complete man, a fully perfected man, you need to master all 3 of these areas: mind, body, and emotions. Now, of those three, emotions are usually the ones that are most neglected, and they're usually the hardest to work on. If you think of how difficult it is to cold approach women as compared to go to the gym, for example, it's a lot fucking harder, right? But they also give you the greatest power, the most forceful aura. Hence why when you're doing a lot of cold approach pickup, you really do start to tap into what can almost feel like supernatural powers. I mean, you're probably not going to get that just from going to the gym or working on your business. Now, this is a video about aura, about magnetism, about making women attracted to you and making them want to have sex with you. And it might seem like we've gotten off that topic, but we actually haven't. See, what I've found is that this higher level of work of transmuting the sexual energy, this gives you aura as well. And in fact, this is actually where the strongest, the purest, and the most radiant aura comes from. It does not come from being some little semen retention nerd who made it 300 days without cooming, but meanwhile you've stayed in your basement playing video games the whole time. It doesn't come from going monk mode and avoiding all social interaction. Aura, permanent aura, comes from doing this work. It comes from doing the work of self-perfection and self-mastery. It comes from engaging with the real world through approaching women, working to become successful, building your physical body in the gym, going up against resistance in all those things, experiencing pain, and then adapting and changing and perfecting yourself to overcome that resistance. That's where aura comes from. It doesn't come from doing nofap for 100 days. It comes from using the energy you get from nofap and directing it into self-empowerment. Making yourself a more capable and resourceful man who is able to bend reality to his will. It comes from being a man who has a will and who is able to impose that will on external objective reality. This is what magic is. Magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. Now, this is normally almost impossible to do, but semen retention gives you so much excess energy, so much magical power or mana that it's overflowing in you. And so this excess energy can actually be used to create changes in yourself and in your life, which would otherwise be impossible to bring about. And when you're doing this work and you're really engaged in it, things can start to get pretty freaky. I gave you the example earlier of when I'd been doing sexual transmutation for a long period. It was maybe 2 months or so. And a girl literally just jumped into my arms in the middle of the street. I had many other experiences like that, which I'm skipping over here for the sake of time, but just very, very weird experiences with women like that. You know, another time, right around when I was finishing up the Red Magic video, which took me several months to write and produce, I'd also been doing strict semen retention for a long period. I had literally been rejecting very hot girls who were asking to have sex with me. And I remember one evening I'm in my bedroom, I pick up this book on my shelf. It was called The Psychic Power of Hypnosis, Paranormal Abilities and the Hypnotic State. Very old book. I found this in my parents' attic one day, but had never got around to reading it. Anyway, I flip open this book at random, and the page I land on is talking about this woman who lives in America, but she's Irish. And under hypnosis, she was supposedly able to remember her past incarnations in Ireland or something like that, which she had never been to physically. And I remember thinking, that's weird. I'm Irish. I live in Ireland, so that's a funny coincidence. Around that moment, I hear this massive bang, crashing sound coming from my living room. It scares the shit out of me, and I'm like, wow. That doesn't sound good. You know, I live alone. I don't have roommates, but it sounds like something has just exploded in there. So I go in and I investigate, but everything seems to be normal. Nothing seems to have fallen or broken. So I go over to my guitar. It's a Spanish acoustic guitar because it sounded to me as if like a string had snapped or something. But I look at the guitar. It's fine. I run my fingers along the strings. Everything's perfect. Nothing's broken. Okay. Weird, but everything's fine. So I go back into my bedroom. Start reading this book about the paranormal again, which is not a topic I'm normally interested in at all, by the way. Well, about 30 seconds later, I hear another loud crash coming from the living room. This one much louder than before. So I go inside again. This time, I find that my guitar has exploded. Every single string has snapped off the guitar. Or to be more precise, the bridge had snapped off. You can see a picture here that I took right after this happened. And what's so strange about that is that, you know, maybe the bridge was already coming off just from normal wear and tear. It was an old guitar, so that's to be expected. But I had just been in there and I had just plucked the strings pretty hard. And so if the bridge was just barely hanging in there and was about to pop off, surely it would have done that when I touched the strings. But it didn't. They seemed to be absolutely rock solid when I touched it. But when I went into the next room, suddenly the guitar explodes on its own. Crazy. Also, it doesn't explain what caused the initial crashing sound, which I heard the first time. You know, none of this made any sense at all. Also, the night before this happened, I'd had all sorts of strange experiences. You know, I'd gone to a nightclub and when I'd gone to pay the cover charge, suddenly the card machine stopped working. And so I said, well, do you want cash? I had cash on me. Wouldn't have been a problem. They said, no, that's fine. You go in for free. A little earlier, I'd been at a different bar ordering a drink. The bartender pours me a second drink for free. On the house, no explanation given. I'd never seen this bartender before in my life. I wasn't even being particularly nice to him or anything, but he just gave me a free drink for no reason. And later, I'm walking home that night, I'm walking through the streets in the fog, not a single car or person around for miles. I need a taxi. Suddenly, I see a taxi appear from out of the fog in the distance, from out of the mist, and it flashes its lights at me. As if like, you rang, sir? And it's like, well, actually I didn't. Actually, I just had the thought that I needed a taxi and suddenly one appears. Very fucking weird. And then of course the next day, this thing happens where my guitar explodes. So all these weird sorts of things may start to happen to you when you're doing this work at a very high level. And you know, the magnetism to women, it's just like the tip of the iceberg of some of the weirdness here. These are very powerful energies, very powerful forces we're playing with. As I said, I think that this is about electricity. I don't necessarily think it was a ghost or a poltergeist or anything like that. I think that when you're doing this work, you may be causing mild electrical changes in the atmosphere of the air around you. That might explain why my guitar exploded. It might be something to do with the air pressure, which is related with electricity, electrical conductance. And I think that this is affected not just by semen retention, but by the intensity of the work of sexual transmutation that you're engaging in while doing retention. For example, again, when that happened to me, I'd been working for months very intensely on creating that red magic video and a few other big things. My thoughts were fully occupied by it. I was very focused on trying to bring that into the world. And it's that sort of intensity, that sort of purity of motive, and that single-minded focus on manifesting your will, which semen retention is only a part of, that is actually what gives you the strongest aura and magnetism to women. You know, when we get up to this higher level of the great work, what that refers to is what the alchemists called in Latin the Magnum Opus. However, this word Magnum Opus can also be translated to mean masterpiece, like how a great artist like Michelangelo or Leonardo will create their masterpiece. And that is what the great work really is. It's about creating a masterpiece, but it's about making yourself into the masterpiece. Now, as you do that, and as you do it for a long time, this now begins to shade into the final and highest level of magnetism and aura, and it's one that I maybe shouldn't even be talking to you about. This is the highest, the most potent, and most powerful degree of magnetism you can have. It is the domain of what we can roughly say are supernatural powers. The lower levels of magnetism are controlled by physical matter, things like hormones, testosterone, pheromones, things you can actually put under a microscope and examine them. As we go up these levels, we're talking about more and more subtle, finer forms of matter. And at this highest level, we're now talking about forces that science cannot understand. And we're talking about experiences and states here that are basically incomprehensible and they cannot be explained in human language. So this highest level of retention, magnetism, and aura, this has to do with and touches on the domain of what is traditionally called the occult or the religious. It is getting up to what are commonly called mystical experiences, religious experiences, experiences in which the presence of God or gods are felt. Now, with everything I'm going to say in this video from this point on, please understand we're talking here mostly by using things like metaphors, analogies, figures of speech. Don't take any of what I'm about to say strictly literally. It can't be explained literally because, as I said, these experiences and states of consciousness transcend the limits of language. Trying to put them into language is like trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. The moment you try to explain these things in words, it inherently weakens them, it dilutes them, it makes them less potent. It's for this reason the Tao Te Ching says, those who know, don't say, and those who say, don't know. Now, if this is true, which in my opinion it is, and if even trying to put these things into language is almost like an offense against them, why am I doing it? Well, I'm doing it because, and you won't see this discussed on other esoteric channels, there is a link, there is a very strong link in my experience between these higher mystical states and your powers of magnetism to attract women. From what I've seen, it just cannot be denied. It's absolutely clear to me that my magnetism is at its strongest to the point it feels borderline supernatural when I'm in or have just experienced these tastes of higher states of consciousness. And so I actually hate talking about this stuff because I think it cheapens it, but I think it is necessary to talk about it here, and it's my duty to at least try to express it to you because it does directly relate to this material, worldly domain of being extremely attractive and magnetic to girls. And there's a very surprising and sort of controversial reason for why I think that is the case, which we'll get to in a moment. The bottom line is basically that we're not really meant to be in these higher states as human beings. And there are certain powers, certain forces who run this place, and they don't want us to get too high up in terms of our level of consciousness. Now, again, I'm speaking here metaphorically, I'm speaking symbolically. You can read into this what you will, but basically what happens is if you get too high up, if you start to get into this mystical level of consciousness and actually stay there, it's almost like these higher forces sit up and take notice. And they're like, hey, hold on a minute. He's not supposed to be here. And so what I'm going to say now is a little bit controversial. What I think happens is that they will almost kind of possess certain women and make those women seek you out, throw themselves at you, seduce you, sleep with you in order to get you to ejaculate, break semen retention, stop transmuting, and knock you back down to where you're meant to be. And I realize what I'm saying sounds insane. I realize this sounds borderline schizophrenic. I've seen proof of it though. Things have happened to me that have convinced me very, very thoroughly that something like this is actually the case. So that's what I want to discuss here. I want to talk about aura and semen retention at the highest level. And again, we started off talking about aura in the context of hormones, pheromones, biology, evolution, which applies to our physical bodies. As you progress in this work, you're getting higher and higher off the ground. You're getting away from things that are purely physical and into domains that are called spiritual or mystical. And in these spiritual domains, things work kind of different from what we're used to. There's this whole other world out there which we don't have any familiarity with. We're not taught about it in school unless you went to school in Tibet or something. Now, there's no linear or logical way for me to talk about this topic, so I'm just going to throw a couple different big ideas about this at you in no particular order. First off, we need to talk about DMT, the so-called spirit molecule. DMT is the most powerful hallucinogen known to man. It's found in the plant ayahuasca, and when people do this drug, they reliably encounter beings, entities, even gods, or perhaps some would say demons. The point is, if you read about the experiences of people who've done ayahuasca, you start to get the strong impression that these beings people encounter appear to be, at least sometimes, fully autonomous. Meaning, of course, sometimes they're just purely subjective hallucinations, but it does appear that when people do this drug, they are potentially tapping into other worlds, other dimensions of reality that may actually be real, but which our brain normally filters out. Now, this is congruent with ideas from biology and evolution, as expressed in the book The Case Against Reality by the cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman. And the basic point he makes in that book is that evolution has not designed us to see things as they actually are. It doesn't select for truth, it selects for fitness, meaning you only see reality insofar as it helps your physical body to survive and reproduce, because those are the only things that are selected for in evolution. However, there might be all sorts of other layers of reality, other dimensions, possibly even other living beings in the room with you right now, but you didn't evolve to be able to see those things because they didn't pose a direct threat to your survival, nor would seeing them have helped you to reproduce. Consequently, we see only a tiny, tiny sliver of what's actually real, but there might be all sorts of other stuff going on, other dimensions that we do not see. Now enter a drug like DMT or ayahuasca. DMT seems to disorder the mind and basically break down the filter in your brain that stops you from seeing these other dimensions. With me so far? I realize we're covering a lot of stuff here. Please bear with me though, because believe it or not, this all has a direct bearing on attracting women and getting laid. I'm not just talking about this stuff for fun, so please bear with me. Okay, so the theory is DMT breaks down this filter in your brain, lets you see other dimensions of reality, which are not normally accessible to us. Now, the next thing that's very important to understand here is that DMT is produced in the human body naturally. It's not like LSD, which is a synthetically created drug. Your brain actually has a tiny amount of DMT in it right now. And scientists are still undecided about why the brain would produce a hallucinogen and what function it might serve in our organism. Now, what I think, and this is just speculative, I haven't seen any scientific evidence for it, but what I strongly suspect is doing semen retention and sex transmutation for a long period might increase the brain's production of endogenous DMT. This would explain things like Kundalini experiences, where people get high and literally hallucinate from working with some of these energies in different forms of meditation, even when they haven't taken a drug. So, in the same way that semen retention seems to increase testosterone, dopamine, etc., and that's why it makes you feel more motivated, more determined, more masculine, and so on, I think that long-term semen retention also increases DMT in the brain. Again, this is purely speculative. Now, what that means, if true, is that when you do sexual transmutation for a long period of time, you'll tend to find yourself slipping into these mystical states more and more often. This is actually talked about a lot in semen retention and nofap communities. It's very common that guys who do this work of controlling their sexual energy start to have these satori experiences, mystical experiences, experiences. Basically, it can feel like you're high on MDMA or LSD or something. And so what seems to be happening is that there are these endogenous chemicals like DMT that give you access to higher states of consciousness that may even let you see hidden dimensions and aspects of reality that are absolutely real, possibly even more real than our normal day-to-day reality. And so if you do semen retention for long periods, like several months, your body has more energy to work with, it produces more of these chemicals, and consequently you start to get tastes of and glimpses into these higher layers of reality more and more. Now, something really, really important I want to say here before we go any further with this is we're getting into territory that if you're not careful how you approach this, you could wind up turning yourself schizophrenic. You could end up getting psychosis. And if you have a genetic tendency towards those things, or if you do a lot of drugs or something, you could wind up permanently breaking your brain and not being able to reverse the damage caused. And I'm not saying this to be dramatic. I know of cases of guys who've experimented with opening their third eye with Kundalini yoga and things like that. And I know of people who have got rid of the filter in their brain which blocks this stuff out and they can't get it back. And that's called schizophrenia. That's called psychosis. You have no barriers anymore. You can perceive these other dimensions of reality, but you can't turn it off. And that's a very, very bad place to be. So you need to tread very carefully here. And what you need to do, the only safe way to access these higher states is, first off, you need to be going to the gym. You need to be lifting weights. This is mandatory, okay? You know how I said earlier that transmutation means perfecting not just your mind, but also your body and your emotions? Well, one of the reasons for that is if you're engaging with the real objective world every day, if you're lifting weights, if you're approaching women and getting real world feedback from them, things like this keep you very grounded in objective reality. They keep you grounded in the physical world, which is important because that's basically like your anchor, which allows you to then play in these higher dimensions, which normally would drive lesser men crazy. But because you have that strong anchor in objective reality and real world feedback, you're much less likely to end up in the loony bin. Now, another key of dealing with these higher levels safely is do not do drugs. I'm not saying that to moralize or to preach to you. I've done every drug there is, believe me. However, you can get all the same states you get on drugs, but do it completely sober. That's what this work is all about. But the main benefit, if you build up to these states slowly through a disciplined practice, and not just through the magic pill of taking a drug, is it means you're able to turn these things off whenever you want. You're able to alternate between these multiple different frequencies of reality at will. And that's not the case when you do drugs. See, the problem with drugs is that they completely dissolve your barrier. They dissolve your boundaries. You have no control over it. And so if you're not careful, a lot of very, very dark things can happen as a result of that. You know, seeing shadow people, getting schizophrenia, getting delusions. You see horrible things in the news every day. You know, a man rapes his own daughter, a woman puts her baby in the microwave. How are things like that even possible? Well, it's because of mental illness, of course. However, if you look into cases like this, you almost always find that the people involved drink heavily and or they take drugs. And when you do that, it breaks down your boundaries and stuff can then get into people. Dark forces can get into them and use them and essentially create actual objective hell on earth. It's really as if hell itself has actually been raised and has manifested itself in actual situations in our own world. So what I'm saying is, if you want to play at this level, you've got to be very, very good at enforcing your boundaries and staying anchored in objective reality, doing things that give you real world feedback every single day. That comes from, again, avoiding drugs, lifting heavy weights, working hard, and approaching women. It's actually a big one. That continuous real world feedback, including negative feedback that you get from doing these things, keeps you very grounded in this reality and it stops you getting lost in delusions and imagination. If you play in these realms without a strong physical body and without a strong will cultivated by discipline, you're going to get into a lot of trouble because the things in these other realms are going to see you as an easy target. They're going to see you as someone who they can walk all over, play tricks on, deceive, use for their own ends. And you need to have a sort of swagger and a dominance to you when you're on the astral plane. It's almost like you need to look at it like you're a lion tamer or someone who trains a dog, you know? Like, I'm the boss here. I command you, you don't command me. That's what Jesus is doing constantly if you read the Gospels. He's constantly commanding demons and they're obeying him. And it's funny, you know, it's actually a lot like having frame control when you're a pickup artist. Like when you walk up to a big group of hot girls in a bar, like, hey, what's going on? Who's in charge here? You know, even if there's guys in their group who are bigger than you and you're just some little nerd, they sort of feel like, whoa, this guy is so confident, he must have some kind of authority here. I better be nice to him. It's the same way with these creatures, these entities from other dimensions. You've got to have frame control with them. Don't let them walk all over you. That's the problem with schizophrenics and psychotics, is they take orders from these things instead of giving them orders, instead of putting them to work. A magician gives orders. He doesn't take orders. Of course, you do have to have reverence to the gods, but that's a different question. So, how does any of this relate to attracting women, you might be asking? Well, this is where things start to get very interesting. And I hinted about this earlier. And what I'm about to say here, again, it's speculation. It's just a model. It's a map that I found that seems to very accurately describe the territory. But remember, at all times, the map is not the territory. So, with that caveat in mind, let me attempt to describe to you how magnetism at the very highest level, the supernatural level, works. So, like I said before, I don't think we are meant to get into these higher states and stay there. Something very interesting that kept coming up when I was researching this, I read hundreds of different descriptions of the DMT experience from different people. One of the recurring things that came up many times for different people who had never met each other was they'd do DMT and they'd break through to some other dimension. And very commonly, they would have this experience that the beings in these other dimensions would be looking at them in a kind of hostile way, like, you're not supposed to be here. And so I think we're not meant to be at these higher levels for extended periods. There are forces, there are beings, there are maybe sort of like administrators of the system who make sure that it's running smoothly. And when you get up to these higher levels and start seeing stuff you're not supposed to see, they get kind of concerned. They're like, he's not supposed to be here. That's weird. How did he get this far? Isn't the porn good enough for him? What's wrong with this guy? He's some kind of nut? Now again, normally people only get up there with drugs like DMT, but that's temporary, it's over quick, so they get pulled right back down. And so that doesn't worry the rulers too much. But if you've been accessing these higher states from semen retention, it's slower to build up to, but it's much more stable once you're there. And so they're looking out on the astral plane and they're seeing you, but unlike these other guys, you're not fucking off. You're staying there for long periods and they can see you kind of snooping around and examining the place, and they start to get kind of freaked out.
Am I to understand the Russian ambassador is to be admitted entrance to the war room?
That is correct. He is here on my orders.
I don't know exactly how to put this, sir, but are you aware of what a serious breach of security that would be? I mean, you'll see everything. You'll see the big board.
And so basically, the rulers, the programmers of the simulation, they have all these safeguards in place to stop you from getting this high and to knock you back down. The initial safeguard is obviously the temptation to masturbate and watch porn. That knocks out most guys almost immediately. But if you make it past that safeguard, well, what else can they throw at you? They have to start throwing real women at you. That's the only way to knock you back down. So what happens is, and I've seen this in my own life, women will literally come up to you and basically proposition you for sex. Not in those exact words, of course, but they'll make it super obvious. Girls from your past who you haven't seen for months or years will start texting you out of the blue, asking you for sex. And so when something like that happens, particularly when it happens right as you're in the middle of experiencing these more mystical states, at that point, we're probably not talking about radiations from your body anymore, because the girl might be 50 miles away sending you this text. So why does she send it? Why does the idea suddenly occur to her, I really want to fuck Mike right now? You know, it doesn't matter that she rejected you before or hasn't seen you in a year. Well, what I think it is that they're literally getting possessed. They're getting used as an instrument, as a tool by the rulers, the programmers, who are now trying to throw girls at you, throw sex at you to knock you off your course. Because if you stay on course, you might wind up getting real knowledge of how things actually work at these higher levels. And what's dangerous about that from their point of view is that having got this knowledge, you might then start sharing what you know with people down here on this plane. And if lots of people start figuring out how this whole deal actually works, then the guys in charge, they might start running into serious problems. And there's lots of different theories about this. You know, this may be because they are farming us like cattle. They're harvesting our energy. And if too many people wake up, then that puts their whole operation in jeopardy. Or it might even be because they are genuinely here to help us, but we're just not supposed to be at these higher levels for long. You know, maybe we really just are supposed to live mainly at the normal physical level, do things like have sex, get a wife, have kids, work a job. Maybe that normie lifestyle is actually in our interest, and going to these higher levels is not what we're meant to be doing right now. But either way, whatever the reason is, what's clear is that these rulers, these programmers, they don't want us to acquire too much knowledge, and so they really do. They throw women at you to knock you off the path. Now, what's interesting about that is, once this has happened to you a few times, you can almost sort of use this to maneuver the simulation into giving you what you want. For example, you could use this to get the exact type of girl you want. Like, if they throw a cute girl at you, but you refuse her, you actually turn her down for sex because she's not exactly what you're looking for, and you keep doing the great work, well, how can they stop you now? They have to throw an even hotter girl at you. But what happens if you turn her down? Well, now they have to put an even hotter girl in front of you, and then a hotter one and a hotter one. And maybe if you still refuse all those girls and you keep doing this work and you keep progressing in it, now maybe they start to get really panicked. They have to take out the big guns, and so they have to throw your dream girl at you. They have to throw a literal total 10 at you. They have to give you true love with an absolutely gorgeous girl, someone who you just can't say no to. And so then it becomes a question of, are you going to take a deal? And if so, what deal are you going to take?
Do we have a deal, Mr. Reagan?
I don't want to remember nothing. And I want to be rich. You know, someone important.
Whatever you want, Mr. Reagan.
Okay. You get my body back in a power plant. Reinsert me into the Matrix. I'll get you what you want.
So, we said at the start, at these lower levels, magnetism happens through more simple things like pheromones. It then gets into your electromagnetic field, which creates a stronger magnetism than pheromones. It extends further from your body, it's more potent. By the time we get up here, we're talking about a kind of magnetism to women that is the most potent, but it seems to be caused by entirely different things. Like, at this highest level, magnetism almost seems to happen in the negative. Like, in other words, the people or powers who run this place, they want to keep you out of the control room. They don't want you to see the big board. And so if you persist in this, they will literally throw girls at you, make those girls very sexually available to you in order to knock you back down into the physical. I've had all kinds of crazy experiences, threesomes with 18-year-old girls, stripper girlfriends, same-day lays, 20-minute lays. And it's because I think I was pursuing this mystical knowledge in a very determined way that they're not usually used to. And basically, they don't like that upstairs. And so they will bribe you with girls to knock you off retention and to get you out of there. And you could argue then, at that point, it's kind of a win-win. They get what they want, you get what you want. Seems like a fair trade to me.
Then we have a deal.
I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious. After 9 years, you know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss.
And so to wrap up here, this is actually the answer to a big question many people have been asking me in recent months since I made that red magic video. A lot of guys have asked me to clarify what is the difference between red magic and white magic. Because as I said in that video, red magic is about using semen retention to get magical powers. White magic is also about using semen retention to get magical powers. So what is the difference between them? And the answer is, although their technique for acquiring power is the same, they have completely different goals. And to understand this, you have to understand a little bit about the Buddhist doctrine of reincarnation. What the Buddhists and also the Hindus and the Christian Gnostics and many others say is that after we die, we get reincarnated in this world or recycled, which is bad. Because according to them, life is suffering. And living in this world, as good as it sometimes is almost always extremely painful and difficult. And if you don't think that, if you think that's overly pessimistic, then imagine you had to be reincarnated to live in a third world country in some slum and you had no legs or something. For most people on this planet, if you just look at it objectively, life really, really sucks. And so that's the main premise of Buddhism, Hinduism, Gnosticism, a lot of these doctrines. Reincarnation is inescapable, and that's a bad thing because existence is suffering. So Buddhism and these other spiritual paths, which I refer to as white magic, they start from the premise that the purpose of acquiring spiritual knowledge and mystical insight is to escape from the wheel of reincarnation, to get out of this hell on earth that is the physical world, to not have to be recycled anymore, and to ascend to heaven or nirvana or a pure land Buddha field or whatever you want to call it. So to put that in the context of everything we said in this video, white magic is about escaping the simulation. And all of the semen retention practices and the meditation and enlightenment practices are ultimately geared toward that end for the white magician. Even mainstream Christianity has a very similar philosophy. It rejects the world. It doesn't believe in reincarnation, but Christianity still says the point of all this is to live in a way that you can basically escape from this nightmare of the physical world so that you can finally get to heaven. And once you're in heaven, you just stay there forever. Never have to come back here again. You just don't even look back. Heaven is great. Stay there forever, for eternity. That's the whole idea, right? Now, red magic has a very different philosophy. It uses all the same mystical and occult techniques like semen retention, but this isn't done to escape the simulation. This is done with the goal of controlling the simulation instead, acquiring the power that lets you reprogram the simulation to give you whatever you want. And so the red magician doesn't see the physical realm as bad. The way he sees it, as long as he has enough power to manifest the things he wants in the physical realm, then the physical realm becomes almost like a kind of playground. Why would he ever want to leave? It's like being in a lucid dream, or it's like being a rock star. And so the red magician is happy to be reincarnated here again and again if necessary. His only condition, his only demand, what he's working towards, is that unlike most people who get amnesia and they forget everything that happened to them in their past life every time they get reincarnated, the red magician wants to remember. Now, he doesn't necessarily need to know the details of his past lives or who he was. What he does want is to still remember all of the skills he learned in those past lives. For example, if he spent his life learning mathematics, that carries over into his next incarnation. If he spent his whole life learning music, that carries over. If he spent a lifetime learning to seduce women, that carries over. And so even if he does end up getting reincarnated into a bad situation, like being born in that third world slum or whatever, if he mastered business and commerce in his previous lifetimes, then he's going to have the knowledge he needs to get out of that slum and into a penthouse very, very fast. And this is indeed what we actually see in life. There are certain people who are so naturally good at certain things, they have such an innate talent for it, that it appears like they already mastered it from a previous life. And so you can think of it like this. The white magicians, they just want to escape this place. And so they keep getting reincarnated until eventually they disappear, they escaped, they're gone, they left the simulation, they're not coming back, you'll never see them again. But the red magicians, they never leave this place. They just keep getting reincarnated over and over, but with every incarnation, they acquire more and more power. They acquire a greater and greater ability to bend this physical world into whatever shape they desire. And so the red magicians become almost like these kind of rogue programs in the system. They end up being the lords of the earth. This is what all great scientists are, all great artists, anyone who's doing anything worthwhile, they are doing magic. And this isn't their first rodeo. They acquired knowledge of their specialty over many previous lifetimes, but rather than escaping the simulation and no longer being reincarnated, which they could have done if they wanted, they chose to keep being reincarnated because they love the joy of continuously learning, deepening their knowledge, expanding their power, and deepening their mastery to shape this objective reality that we're all in. And that is ultimately what this whole semen retention thing and the great work is all about. There is a much deeper game to be played here. It's not just about what you get in this incarnation, it's also about acquiring power and knowledge and transforming yourself so that you can get whatever you want in your future incarnations as well. Or you could just use this to that hot blonde girl, you know, pop out a couple kids. It's up to you. I'm not here to tell you how to live. I'm just here to tell you how I live and how I've been living for the past couple hundred years.
It's a coven! A coven, let me out!
It's your coffin, my love. Enjoy it. Most of us never get to know what it feels like.
It's good stuff. I would have been happy to join them. Good stuff.
I assume I need no introduction.
All I longed for death. I invited it. A release from the pain of living.
Oh, Louis.
Is open to anyone.
Still whining, Louis. Have you heard enough?
But it was
I've had to listen to that for centuries. Don't be afraid. I'm going to give you the choice I never had.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth
and taste.
So, in this video, I've talked about how to make women attracted to you using semen retention. But the truth is, what I've given you here is just the appetizer. The main course is my program, The Girlfriend Button. And The Girlfriend Button is a book I wrote which shows you how to get a young, sexy girlfriend. And you know, there's a lot of dating advice out there which tells you how to get the 5s and 6s, but it doesn't really work on the top girls, those truly girlfriend-worthy girls who you might call the 9s and 10s. So, I put together a course which shows you how any guy can get a girlfriend who's legit 9 or 10, no matter your looks, age, or money. And it's called The Girlfriend Button because it lets you program any girl to fall in love with you and make her into your girlfriend as easily as pushing a button. And the trick to doing this all comes down to something simple that you're probably already doing to some extent, and that is texting. The texts you send a girl play a huge role in whether she decides to ghost you or come over to your house and wrap her juicy lips around your you-know-what. In fact, there is one specific type of text, which I'll show you in The Girlfriend Button, which gets a girl to become obsessed with you the very first time you send it. I call them predictive programming texts. Predictive programming is a technique used in psychological warfare. The idea is that you want to get the girl to imagine and visualize the future that you're trying to create. Because as humans, we always tend to move towards whatever future we can visualize most clearly. And so the thing is, when you say stuff to a girl that gets her to imagine being your girlfriend, over time she's going to start feeling like she really is your girlfriend. And this makes it really, really easy to get her out on a date with you, and then from there to get her into bed. And I'll give you a real life example of this that happened to me just a few months back. I was at a bar called Cafe en Seine. It was about 1 a.m. and I saw this really hot girl. She turned out to be Ukrainian, early 20s, beautiful body, really good looking. And I really liked this girl from the first moment I saw her. So after I approached her, I started using some predictive programming on her. And one of the things I said to her was, "You're my girlfriend for the next 5 minutes." Now, I said this like it's a joke, which it was. You know, I wasn't actually asking her to be my girlfriend. I was just playing around and inviting her to do this little role play with me. You're my girlfriend, but just for the next 5 minutes. You know, I wasn't being needy. I wasn't begging her to be my girlfriend. My whole tone here was teasing, flirtatious, bantering. And also, very importantly, I wasn't asking her or requesting. I was stating it as if it was already a fact. You're my girlfriend. You know, this is the way it is. This is reality now. So what happened? Well, the girl laughed. She giggled. She played along a bit. We talked some more, just normal, polite chit chat, and then we kissed. And long story short, took her back to my place. We kissed some more on the couch. And then on our next date, she came back over to my place. I made her a cup of tea. And we ended up in the bedroom getting naked before the tea had even gotten cold. And I actually did turn that girl into my girlfriend, or maybe you'd call it more like a friend with benefits type situation. But anyway, what am I saying here? Well, the point is, if you're watching this video, you know, odds are, I realize you probably don't want to go to nightclubs and cold approach girls and tell them you're my girlfriend for the next 5 minutes. You know, that will work if you got the swag to pull it off, if you got some riz, if you're already good at approaching women. But what I want to talk about now is how to use this same principle if you're a guy who's maybe less experienced getting girls. You know, maybe you don't want to cold approach any girls ever. Maybe you're looking for something just very easy and safe that you can try at home right now. And that's why I put together this program for beginners and intermediate guys, which I call the Girlfriend Button. Because this will show you how to get a smoking hot girlfriend or multiple girlfriends just by sending them a few magic text messages that I'm going to show you in a moment. And this program took me ages to create because it's basically 2 programs in one. You know, one part shows you how to use predictive programming to get hot girlfriends from online dating apps. And the other part shows you how to use this technique to get girlfriends, hookups, one-night stands, etc. from cold approach pickup. So, you know, meeting girls in the grocery store, at the gym, in the street, shopping malls, bars and clubs, if that's your thing. But the big emphasis in the Girlfriend Button is really on texting and on online dating because, like I said, I realize that's where most beginners are going to feel most comfortable. I'm going to show you my exact profiles on Hinge and Tinder that got me dozens of very, very hot girlfriends, buddies, sexual playmates, etc. I'm going to give you the exact word-for-word texts you need to send a girl if you want her to become obsessed with you, and you can literally just copy and paste these and get started right away. And even more importantly, and this is the really vital part, I'm going to show you how to stop getting flaked on, how to stop getting ghosted, how to stop getting ignored and getting no good matches on the apps. And again, how do you do this? It all comes down to predictive programming. You've got to get her imagining a relationship with you before you ever even ask her out on a date. And the Girlfriend Button is the only program out there which shows you how to do that. And it even gives you a full cheat sheet of lines and text that actually do it for you. So you don't even have to come up with what to say on your own. And when you use these copy-paste attraction triggers, especially one very specific 12-word text message that I'm going to give you, I guarantee you will be able to handpick your girlfriend from these dating apps. You'll be able to sleep with the top girls in the apps, the girls who every other guy there is chasing, and you won't even have to commit to them right away. You can just sleep with them, keep them as your F-buddies for a few weeks or months, and then on that basis, you can decide whether or not this girl is really girlfriend-worthy and whether you want to keep her around and get more serious or not. It's also great if you just want to play the field, date multiple women, not get too serious with any of them, and just enjoy relationships on your terms. You know, there's some really hot girls out there who just want something completely casual as well. Past year I dated a couple strippers who were like this, and these are girls who I only see them maybe once every month or so, but when I want to, I can just call her up, she comes over to mine, and then we have sex for a weekend or whatever. So when I use the word girlfriend here in the girlfriend button, you know, I'm talking about, this gets you everything from a girl you'd want to have as a wife to just very casual F-buddies and girls you party with once a week or so. It really is up to you how you want to use this. There is even a chapter where I show you how to get your girl to invite her hot female friends into the bedroom for a threesome, which, having done this, I can honestly tell you is literally one of the top 5 happiest experiences of my entire life. So I really would recommend reading that chapter so you can check that off your bucket list, so to speak. Alright, so that's just a little teaser for this program of mine called the Girlfriend Button, and if you want to get the Girlfriend Button, or if you want to learn more about it first, click the link in the description below right now. That will take you to a video on my own website, which is uncensored. It's a little bit sexually explicit, so don't open it and work. And in that video, you're going to learn about the 12-word text that literally programs hot girls to chase you into bed. This works no matter your looks, age, or money. So click the link in the description now before I take this video down, or before it gets censored in some way or another, which is happening more and more these days. Click the link below and watch the video right now. Because truthfully, I do not know how much longer it's going to stay up for. It could be gone tomorrow for all I know, and then you'll never get a chance to hear about this again. So click the link and watch the free training video on the next page that I put together for you. But only if you're tired of getting ghosted by girls, you're tired of having girls leave you on red, you're tired of getting flaked on, ignored, never getting any good matches on online dating. If that's you, then you need to watch this video on the next page, because I'm going to show you exactly what you need to put in your profile and text girls to stop this from ever happening again. And how to quickly get a very, very hot girlfriend with a bubble butt, a perfect body, and a cute, quirky personality. Click that link right now, and I'll see you on the other side.